So we have still some great stuff ahead of us for this in our the next in our series on uh, the road to flavorful hope.
Mhm.
This week we're talking about spiritual ferment, and it's an interesting concept, and I'm looking forward to the conversation a little bit. The teaser for today is when you start a major project with high hopes, like, I don't know, a term paper or remodeling a house or hosting an event, but it fails
Mhm.
or you hit walls in the process of working on it. What are you most likely to do? To give up, to try again, to wait till next year? Do you have a, a most likely scenario for you?
Hmm. Oh, I I guess I think it depends on the situation, what
Sure,
you're
sure.
particularly talking about.
Yeah, sure.
Examples? I don't know.
Well,
But
I'll give you an
I
example.
have been a quitter and I have been
Oh,
an
sure.
endurer. So it's gone both ways.
Yeah, yeah. Last year, um, I was so impressed with one of the speakers for our fall worships workshops that I tried to set up a time where we would get together socially,
Hmm.
her and my family, to have dinner and conversation.
Hmm.
And we kept running into these roadblocks. One day, one week she would be busy, and another week we would be busy, and it we went back and forth about six times,
Yeah.
and then we just haven't done anything since. I think we gave up is what we decided. The to be superstitious, which I'm not super superstitious. We just decided the stars were aligned against us.
It's a
And
fun metaphor, even if you don't believe it literally. Yeah.
yeah, this just isn't working out. So the reason that I'm using that as an example is because particularly in our Old Testament lesson, we're going to talk about that reality from God's point of view. And it is, in a sense, a subtext or an undercurrent for our New Testament lesson, too. So it's really interesting to uh, think about how this concept of what do we do in the face of repeated discouragement, let's say. Um, it is also part of the subtext for our conversation uh, about Roxburgh this week. Did you have a chance to read stuff this week?
I read the introduction in the first chapter.
Oh, you're great.
I didn't know
So
but how
I,
far we get, but
what's that?
I didn't know how far we'd get in a single session, but I
Oh no, that's
just
I
going
don't know
through.
how far we'll get either, but let's take a look for a moment at the introduction. Did you have things in particular that you either found interesting or questionable as you were going along?
It's somewhat familiar territory. I mean, these developments that we've been going through, and it's interesting. He uses the term Euro-tribal churches,
Yeah, I think that's an interesting term. Yeah, yeah.
but the, the metaphors of journey and passage. I I always
Sure.
appreciate those. Um, course, I even did a sermon on it once, and about back at the old church about what we were going through, and we're,
Yeah.
using that same image of Abraham that we have on page 10 here. And I,
Yeah. It's a great image, a great metaphor, isn't it?
yeah, but it's one we lived through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting you were living through it physically, and we have continued to live in that metaphor uh, since then,
Yeah.
spiritually and intellectually, emotionally. Yeah. Uh, the in particular, I'd like to draw uh, your attention to modernity's wager that he talks about on page 1.
Hmm. That we can get along without God.
Yeah, we can get along with that, God.
Yeah.
And and really that's been the set of promises that our society has made, whether it's we're talking about the capitalist system of the US or the mostly social democratic socialist democratic societies of Europe. They've made some promises about what the good life would be. What are some of the things that are in your list of promises that our leadership has made to us over the particularly in the early part in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But there's still promises that people are making now. What are some of the promises you think of?
Well, not just our leaders, but in
Right?
general in the West, because some
Yeah,
they sure vary. But I'm thinking of universal health care, a living wage. Hard work will get you places, and you know,
yeah.
supposedly, I mean, it all depends on an assumption that life is fair, and unfortunately, life is not always working out that way, especially for people who were already at a disadvantage.
There there was a sense in which we talked about leveling the playing field.
Hmm. But it's always a zero-sum game these days, it seems. You know, and if you if you want to raise somebody up, somebody thinks has to go down, and they resist that. Um,
That's right. I think we often think about mm, we often approach the world from a scarcity
yeah,
viewpoint.
yeah.
This is not my thinking. I think I first ran across it in M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled, the ethic of scarcity. Because, as you say, we think of it as a zero-sum game, when I'm pretty sure it's not. Um, so that ethic of abundance that's built into, I would say, certainly Judeo-Christian thinking. You could broaden that probably, but there's a sense in which the world is a place of abundance, and we usually approach it from the standpoint of scarcity. Um, the underlying philosophical uh, piece of the modernity's wager is that the self is the um, the primary unit of authority around us. Um, so as we look at the introduction here, um, kind of the middle of page one.
A child becoming independent.
Yeah, yeah. We don't need the Christian. We don't need religion really. We are mature agents in control of our own destiny. For those who need it, there's still a religious tradition. Have a good time. I would be my commentary on that. God has not disappeared, but become useful, a resource in our journey to independence. God, however, has nothing to do with systems, structures, and operations of everyday life. Um, just the I kind of admire the chutzpah, if you will, that we're just don't bother us too much with any of this God stuff. We could do just fine without it. The At the top of page two, this is one of the things I think is this paragraph is, I think, one of the essential ones. Would you read that paragraph for us,
Um,
starting with all of us?
oh, because that's the continuation of a paragraph that starts on previous. So
It is. It is, but well, you could start there. Let's start at the beginning of at the bottom of page one then.
we argue in this book that modernity's wager has been far more corrosive to human thriving than any of its architects would have imagined. All of us in the West are part of the unraveling of this wager. Further, we propose that this unraveling is only part of the story. There is another story forming within the unraveling. It is about a ferment and bubbling happening across the West, within which God is continuing to make all things new. The missiological challenge before the churches is to embrace the this ferment in the confidence that God is the primary agent in the sea change that is remaking the West. God is present in this disorienting change. Leslie Newbigin asked, "Can the West be converted?" The response is yes, but make no mistake, the missiological challenge is not to focus on fixing or reforming the churches, but to participate in the spirit in the refounding of an unmoored society.
That is quite a mouthful, that paragraph, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you think about his premise?
Well, it's kind of it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. You know, trying to see God in all the chaos. I mean, a lot of this
Mhm.
stuff I don't think is what God approves of. He doesn't want us to be so divisive and
Yeah,
fighting over everything when we should be talking about cooperation. But
yeah.
so where is God in all the chaos of the politics today? It's hard to see.
I
And
struggle with that.
and some of these politicians think that they have a version of this same statement. They want to help refound society in the image that they have in mind, and but there are different images of what that society should be, and including among people who profess to be Christians.
Yeah, I I think this is this struggle that we're having, that you've underlined, is, I think, a great example of how this ferment is at work. Uh, I guess I'll tell a brief story to help illustrate this from my own life. I was working in the church in Beloit, Wisconsin, Second Congregational Church. Now it's United Church of Beloit. And at the time, geez, this must have been 2005. My mom passed away that September,
Wow.
and I probably should have taken some time off. I decided to work through it. It had mixed results. Um, but I went away for vacation in February that year, and I came back and discovered that the council had basically uh, been in rebellion, in in revolt, and I was on the edge of being fired. And I went away from that meeting realizing I think that in January and February of that year, I had been very unhappy with the church. And so when I got back from that vacation and discovered that the church was unhappy with me, one of the ideas I had as I was praying about it is if we are both unhappy, maybe that's where God is working. If we're both unhappy with where the church is going, maybe that's a space in which the Spirit's working. And so I made a proposal to them. Look, let's spend some time exploring this idea of you're not being happy with me and me not being happy with you. Let's find somebody to come and help us have that conversation. What is it that we're unhappy about? And what we discovered was all of the things they were unhappy about had ended, that those behaviors of mine had ended in November. And so we had, by the grace of God, kind of course corrected, but they were still mad about that. So we hired a consultant to come in and lead those discussions. And what I said is, look, after we've spent 90 days talking about this together, either you're going to decide, you know, we're still unhappy with you, Doug, and you will have spent 90 days in which you know yourselves better, and you'll set the church up for someone besides me. Or in 90 days, we'll decide we still kind of like each other, and we will go on into a process that will help us get out of this mess. And after 90 days, we still liked each other and discovered that God was doing, wanted to do a new good thing, but we had been stuck. And our unhappiness was the sign it was the way time to look for a new way. Now, and let me also say that process that we entered into resulted in a 3-year plan for the church that we worked and grew the church, got us to a completely new and much better place. But it didn't have to go that way, right? There were lots of places where we could have tipped and gone a very different path. I think that kind of unhappiness being a sign of God saying what we're doing isn't working. What do you think about that as a metaphor for thinking about our current societal uh, unhappiness?
Well, guess guess it's fine. It's just so much more complex when you're dealing with a whole nation and all its interactions with every other nation. That it's
Sure.
so too many parties who are angry and not willing to even talk to each other or consider anything besides the path they've already
Yeah.
chosen, including folks like Putin and Netanyahu, set in their ways. There's not going to be any improvement there so long as they're set in their ways.
Yeah, and I don't think they're open to listening
Yeah.
at the moment. I just don't I don't see that.
Yeah. Mhm.
The the thing that Roxburgh draws our attention to is that when things were going wrong in society around us, largely the church tried to fix itself, focusing on what we're not doing right. And there's some merit to that. I get it. But at the
You
end
did
of
that
the
in
day,
you
that
did
wasn't
that in
necessarily
Beloit.
helpful.
Yeah, you did that in Beloit. You focused on what was going wrong, and I mean that was a constructive one. It doesn't always apply to other situations, though, I guess. Yeah.
Well, but one of the things that we realized in that conversation was that we were too inward focused. So were we still trying to fix ourselves, or were we trying to grab onto what Roxburgh calls the missiological challenge?
Mhm.
I love Roxburgh, but man, he's going to use some really tough language, dry language to point out, to try and help us understand. I think that's one of my complaints about him,
Hmm.
is I think he could make the book more accessible, the concepts more accessible. And one of the things in particular, as I'm thinking about church history, and I'm thinking about the church growth movement of the 80s and the 90s, right? And remember, I'm coming of age during that period. I don't know where you were in that period.
Uh, until the early, until the mid '90s, not part of church at all. So yeah.
Sure. I, for me, I was looking at that movement and thinking there were some things they were getting right. I look back at it now and I realize how it reinforced the self. So if we're going to it it fed into the idea of church shopping and consumerism,
Yeah.
which puts us at the center of the church instead of God at the center of our lives.
A lot of people are in that model. That's what they do. They shop around and look for the comfortable pew, as one old book
A
called it.
comfortable pew.
Yeah.
That's a great image. Yeah. What I'd like to do is kind of take this piece of conversation, our conversation about Roxburgh, and kind of see if our Bible passages shed some light on it. So what I'd like to do first is go to Isaiah.
Hmm.
We'll be in chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. Tell me one thing you know about Isaiah.
Well, prophet of the old days, um, 700s, 800s or so,
Yep,
um,
that's very good.
the days before the exiles began. I think even before the Assyrian takeover of the north.
Both.
Yeah,
We
that was
we
the first one.
Yes, he's a prophet. He's also a priest. Comes from a priestly family, which is interesting. And he served 4 different kings. And if we kind of look at what that's like, that would be about 740 BC to about 700. So uh, the Assyrians coming to exile the northern kingdom is 722.
Okay, so he saw the time.
So
Yeah,
he saw that particular thing happen.
yeah.
Um, there's a very dramatic piece where we see Isaiah and Hezekiah. Um, the Assyrians threaten Judah as well, and uh, and are turned away. not by military might, but by kind of circumstances.
Yeah, bad things happening to the Assyrians that make them turn away and yeah, no,
Uh,
this is not the time.
well, and we also see in Isaiah the the Babylonians coming to visit, and Hezekiah is showing them all around, and Isaiah's like, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that."
Yeah,
Um, well, one of the other things to think about with Isaiah is it's in three large sections. Usually, you'll even read in some of the literature about Isaiah that there's first Isaiah, second Isaiah, and third Isaiah.
right.
Uh, there's something to be said for that distinction. The first section of Isaiah has a lot of prophecies, negative prophecies against Israel and its neighbors. I should say Judah, Israel, and its neighbors. Chapters 44 to maybe like 55, give or take, seems to be set in the exile. So actually from Babylon.
Right.
And the third section seems to have to do with them coming home. So the tone in the first section is judgmental, though with aspects of hope and restoration. The second section is more about, there's more prophetic material that has been construed to talk about Jesus. And in the third section, there's really talk about homecoming, which is very positive. So that the tones are very different. I think the only thing that I would add to that is, even if you like this idea of kind of sectioning Isaiah off, there are elements of redaction. Do you know that word?
Oh yeah, like editing.
Editing.
Yeah,
There's evidence of editing the first section from the perspective of at least the second section and perhaps the third. And so on the one hand, sure, let's divide it up, but on the other hand, we have to let the book speak as as with its own voice, and not get too busy reducing it to atomical parts, atomistic parts, I mean. So then let's say something about the immediate context for our passage for today, and that is the first five chapters of Isaiah are prophecies against Jerusalem, Judah, and their leaders. And they do a really interesting job of laying out the problems of the time from God's perspective, God's judgments against them, and also hope of restoration and relationship beyond those. Thoughts or questions so far?
no.
Well, let's read.
All right.
Let's read. Would you read the 8 verses for us?
Starting at
At verse 1.
oh, okay. Sorry, I've still got gunk in my throat.
Oh, no worries.
Let me sing from this is good old RSV, of course.
Yes, yes.
Let me sing for my beloved a song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He digged it with digged it dug. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. And he looked for it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? And when I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste, it shall not be pruned or hoed, and briars and thorns shall grow up. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for
Nice.
justice, and but behold, bloodshed. For righteousness, but behold, a cry. Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field, until there is no more room, and you are made to dwell alone in the midst of the land.
Wow. Now, I mean, we could go on. There are more woes,
Yeah.
many more woes. Um, but this seems to be where there's a section break. Um, what did you notice? What was striking to you about this passage?
Well, the idea that God has been at work preparing this land to be a good land, and yet the people have betrayed that purpose and had violence and injustice instead,
Yeah,
ruining everything.
yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Particularly in the wake of some of our experiences this week.
Yeah.
Uh, there are two different metaphors he uses. You've drawn attention to the vineyard. So
Hmm.
that's the first. What's the second one?
Well, if you're talking about how he moves in the eighth, which is really a different theme when you're talking about the houses and houses shall be desolate, that theme.
Actually, a little bit earlier than that.
Oh,
Um,
my beloved had a vineyard.
Look at verse 4. Sorry, 3 into 4.
Well, the that you mean the metaphor of making the people of Israel and Judah being the vineyard, or what are planted in the vineyard,
Yes.
yielding supposed to yield grapes, but yield wild grapes, which is probably there's other wording for that in other translations.
Well, I like the wild grapes actually because have you seen the difference between wild grapes and regular grapes?
Not sure what the wild grapes are, unless it's just something inedible, like your
Yes,
no,
actually.
right.
Yes, and they're really small. They're really, really small, and they're, as you say, they're inedible. Or occasionally you'll find one that's large enough that you could eat it, but usually sour. It's on the way, but it hasn't become the kind of grape that we would actually want to eat. No, I was thinking of it as a trial metaphor, right? Judge between me and my vineyard.
I see.
So this second, so once we leave verse 2, we're now we're in a different metaphor. He's drawing on the first metaphor. So 3 and 4 are that trial metaphor. So then in verse 5,
The
what are,
verdict.
what are the results?
Yeah. Sounds like withdrawal of protection,
Mm,
a fall from grace.
mm.
I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned. And yeah, desolation, nothing good coming out of that.
So this is one of the interesting things for no, there's nothing good out of that. So this is one of the things I think is um, informs some of my theology. When when I look at this, um, I will take away its hedge and it will be destroyed. Did God do the destroying? Indirectly. The destruction is as a result of the hedge being removed.
Yeah.
Or in the next image, I'll break down its wall and it will be destroyed. Which of course, if we're thinking prophetically, that's what happened to Jerusalem, right? The hedge was knocked down, the wall was knocked down. So is it God doing those things, or is it our choices that have the consequences of distancing ourselves from God in ways that God then can't protect us in the same way? It's a question. I don't know the answer. I I think on balance, I prefer that viewpoint that my choices have consequences. Our choices have consequences. Um, but then in verse 6, he it's back to I will make it a wasteland. So this is part of why I'm not a big fan of punishment, seeing God as the punisher, the holy punisher, because I find it so contrary to Jesus' message of grace.
Right. There's plenty of it in the Old Testament, but often even in the same prophetic books, there, as we saw with Richard Rohr, there's that move from the early negativity into more talk about grace. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I also think it's worth remembering that part of what why God sends prophets is to tell us if nothing changes, this is what's going to happen.
hmm
So the hope um, is not that God will have a chance to punish us, but that we will have a change of heart and behavior that will put us in the path of blessing instead of harm. Uh, and then I included verse 8. I think some lectionaries don't, but I included verse 8 because this is what we're seeing happen in our society right now. It's part of the housing, it's a reflection of a housing crisis. You join field to field till no space is left, and you live alone in the land. The story I heard from one of my colleagues in the ministry, she lives in Saugatuck, Michigan, and on her street there are only two houses that are occupied at Christmas time.
everybody else flew south for the winter.
All the rest are Airbnbs.
Ah, hmm.
They're all rental spaces, and nobody wants to be in Michigan in the winter. So she and the Episcopal priest celebrate Christmas and decorate their houses for each other, since there's nobody else on the street. And and that concept is just wild to me. I know that's just one example of it, and we could probably give more, but wow, really?
Hmm. There's probably somebody out there in Saugatuck who could use some shelter that day, and there
Yeah.
are these empty houses.
I don't know what the unhoused situation is in Saugatuck, but with all of these houses, there shouldn't be any unhoused population in Saugatuck. It- Is that happening here in Salt Lake? Or is there a version of it happening in Salt Lake? I don't know. But it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder. All right, well, we gotta move on to the next one.
Mhm.
Let's go to Matthew chapter 9, and we'll start in verse 9. And we talked about Matthew last time. Um, I'm gonna we're gonna actually meet Matthew in this passage, which is cool. Which is cool. And so it's interesting to think about how his experiences um, affect his writing. But in particular, I want to draw our attention to three contextual factors. One is, remember, Matthew's writing for the Jews. That's his audience, primary audience, not the only one, but primary audience. He has more quotes from the Old Testament, and nobody's quoted more often than Isaiah in in terms of the Old Testament there. And uh, last week we were talking about the Beatitudes and the upside down kingdom. And today I think we're talking about signs of the kingdom coming. So let's read the passage today. Would you read 9 through 12, let's say?
As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as he sat at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and sat down with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners."
Great reading.
Hmm.
What do you think?
Well, there's that element of grace coming out there.
Mm.
That, and I mean, of course, you can also debate whether there are any who are really righteous or not sick. I mean, we all have our needs. But
Yes,
of course, the people he's talking to probably see themselves as righteous and well, and so so at least he's talking their language.
it's a great job drawing our attention to that piece, right? He's speaking to them to help them recognize their own need.
Not sure
Or
it worked, but
no, well, I
you
mean,
can
there's a
try.
piece of me that wonders if Jesus is trolling the Pharisees here a little bit
In the modern sense.
in the modern sense.
So,
Yeah. It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous. Remember, righteous is a relationship word, right? It's the people who have a good relationship with God, a right relationship with God, but sinners. So I think you're absolutely right. He's drawing our attention to that in some really interesting ways. Anything else that strikes you as you're reading this?
well, at the start, it's always interesting when he calls somebody and they just leave what they're doing and
Yeah.
go off. They
Yeah.
it's an immediate trust, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always impressive because that should, I mean, we're more used to being like Nathaniel. Kidding me?
Yeah. Are you kidding? Yeah. 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 That uh, I'm gonna kind of draw on one of the things you said at the outset of your comments on the passage, that here's the grace. What are the grace, the places that we see grace in this passage? Oh, well, you know what? I should read the next section. Hang on, let's finish up. So I'm going to start with verse 14. I'm reading from, I guess I'm going to read from Matthew, from the God's Word translation. Then John's disciples came to Jesus, John the Baptist, or John the Baptizer, depending on how you like to say it. They said, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples never do?" Jesus replied, "Can wedding guests be sad with the groom while the groom is still with them? The time will come when the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. No one patches an old coat with a new piece of cloth that will shrink. When the patch shrinks, it will rip away from the coat, and the tear will become worse. Nor do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins burst, the wine runs out, and the skins are ruined. Rather, people pour new wine into fresh skins, and both are saved." So let's think about the question I was going to ask is, where do you see grace, uh, a sense of grace in this passage that we've been working with? These two, from 9 to 17.
Well, maybe the first place is, his calling this tax collector who is not, appreciated in society. You know, he calls un undesirables to follow him, and
That's wonderful. Undesirable. Jesus desires the undesirable. That's lovely. I agree. I'm going to say it's also grace that Matthew got up and followed him, because there was something in Matthew that rose to that occasion, literally rose to that occasion. I think that's grace. So there's grace in the calling.
then comes the sorry, this sitting down to eat
Yeah.
with the more undesirable people, and
More undesirables.
yeah, maybe some of them were friends of Matthew. He brought them in, as a result.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I think we see some of that um, in the other gospels, maybe clearer than we see here. But nevertheless, yes, I think that's right. And don't you wonder what that party was like?
Yeah, it's it just shows it's not that. I mean, there's a stereotype about how religious people have no fun, I mean,
Yeah,
Jesus was not a Puritan. He wasn't
right,
looking for
right.
everyone to be so mournful and sorrowful.
Yeah, this is one of the places where I think the when we look at the great parties of today, are people behaving beautifully during all of those parties? Maybe not.
It's not my scene.
Yeah,
I, I don't see the appeal.
yeah, it's not really my scene, but I suspect since these were undesirables, the unlovables, that they partied like undesirables. The word sinner there is probably better translated as immoral people, because sinners for us has a particular weight to it. It's not incorrect, but they're either people who are immoral or amoral, but they're still there participating in the party. So I think it's grace that there's a party, and grace that Jesus is having a good time. What so like yeah, keep going.
Or your um,
Yes, we'll keep going on this idea of grace, how we see grace as we go forward in this.
and then the sorry.
No, 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 no problem. You've been fighting back from a cold.
Yeah, it's mostly gone, but the gunk wants to stick in my throat forever. It's uh, but guess the disciples of John want Jesus's disciples to be more serious, more. I mean, they're not they're not being holy enough. You know, we fast. You know, we put ourselves through all this, and why aren't they? You know, and he's
Yeah.
saying that it's like to everything there is a season, and this is this not the season for that.
Yeah, I think Matthew is setting the visit from these disciples of John the Baptist at this party. And it's worth kind of, I don't know if you've heard what what a house like this might have looked like, but it would have a courtyard, and you could see into it from the street. And so people who are walking by can see what the party is like and who's at the party.
Mhm.
And they might even come in. It wasn't considered impolite to crash the party. So you could kind of wander in and have your conversation so that you can imagine John the Baptist's disciples wandering in and
What's
uh,
going on here?
what's going on? What are you why are you partying like this? Shouldn't you be fasting? Again, you're quite right to draw our attention to the what is usually called puritanical impulses in Christianity, ascetic impulses, but that's not in view here. Jesus, so I'm going to add a couple of grace things. I think it's grace that Jesus accepts this party in Matthew and the way that they're having fun. And I think it's also grace that he helps the Pharisees and John the Baptist's followers recognize their need and uh, maybe calls them on the carpet a little bit for being so restrictive of grace, because that's part of what Jesus is doing here is he's trying to widen the aperture of grace so we can see more of it around us. And it's part of why I love this passage is it really helps us widen our own aperture of grace. Are there people we think are undesirable? In the wake of this awful assassination this week, have we thought uncharitably about folks who are in opposition to us, whether we're Republican or Democrat or whatever we want to call ourselves? Have we thought uncharitably about that? Have we thought of them outside the pale of God's grace? I think this passage really might help us take a deep breath
Mm.
and recognize that in God's sight, there are no unlovables or undesirables. There's undesirable behavior, sure, but there's not an undesirable person. There's not a person who is not made in the image of God. Everybody is. And I think this is a real challenge to us as we face these times to widen our aperture of grace and allow God's grace to minister to our judgmental selves. Are we not like the Pharisees? Are we not like the disciples of John? Yeah. I, I say we because I'm in there too, Ken. I don't get any, I don't get a pass from widening my aperture of grace. And so this is part of where I think it's grace that Jesus convicts us and that our hearts see there can be another way. That's what I'd like to pray for us. Can we pray?
Sure.
Mm. Gracious God, you are indeed the one who sees us and loves us in spite of our failures, in spite of the ways in which we have contributed to the negativity around us. And we ask your forgiveness. And we trust in your grace that you can show us another way to be. Help us, oh God, to listen better this week. Help us to see the people around us through your eyes and not just through the lens of conflict or exclusion. Your grace is bigger than that. Help us see clearly. Help us follow you more closely. For we would be your people, set with our hearts set on your purposes. It's all grace, all the time, God.
Yeah.
Amen. Thank you, dear friend.
Mm.
Long, but I'm grateful for your part in the conversation today. Thank you so much for helping me see things.
Okay.
All right. God bless you. Take care.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye bye.